Chike Ukaegbu, 35, is a technology entrepreneur. He is Nigeria's youngest presidential candidate. Mr. Chike, are you running to win? Let's be really serious for a minute. Of all the things in the world, why the presidency of Nigeria?
Okay, this is a question I like to answer because I think it's an opportunity for several of the young people to find the courage they need to face insurmountable challenges, as I would say. So the question, are you running to win? Undoubtedly, yes. Now, why presidency, in spite of any and every other thing I could have been doing? Well, if you look at our nation, I mean, I say when people ask me that question, why presidency? I turn around and in my mind, I ask them, are you living in the same country that I'm living in? I mean, at the point where we are as a nation, every single level-headed, educated, brilliant, qualified person in this nation should be doing everything they can to change the nation. And that includes vying for the presidency. Because the thing with leadership is, as long as the head is wrong, it affects the entire system. So am I running to win? Yes. Is it an insurmountable challenge? Possibly yes, but it's not an impossible one.
You've been branded a Nigerian American. Are you in touch with the realities on ground?
Okay. What do you mean by being in touch with the realities on ground? And I say this because, one, I'm not American. I am full-blooded Nigerian, only green passport, so I like to clarify that. Two, when you ask me if I am in touch with Nigerian realities, is it, one, being born here not good enough to make me Nigerian? Is it, two, going to school from nursery school all the way? I have passed through the entire educational system that we have here, actually up to the university level. Not good enough to be Nigerian enough or to be in touch with the realities? Is it, you know, the experiences of living, of having two middle-class parents, civil servants, who struggle to put 6 of us through school to give us a better life? Is that what does not make me in tune or in touch with the Nigerian reality? Or is it, well, you have not suffered enough, right, for you to be qualified to lead a nation? So I'm trying to understand fully when people ask me the question, are you in touch with being Nigerian enough? What does that mean? Throwing that back at you.
I am your host. You are my guest. So I am the one asking the questions. And I'm sure when I said branded was because that's what a lot of people have called you over time.
Yes.
And I am trying to understand the fact that you are not based in Nigeria. Am I correct?
I am based in Nigeria.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. So you've succeeded in dispelling that rumors.
Yes. I moved back earlier this year.
So you're more than enough Nigerian.
Of course.
Can I understand the top 3 priorities of Mr. Ukaegbu's presidency? Assuming you win, the top major issues that are of concern to you.
Poverty alleviation, I think, is extremely important in strengthening our economy. We cannot do that if we have 87 million people living in poverty. That's one. 2, power. We live in a nation where 55% of our population do not have access to power. Now, in spite of that, however, though, Nigeria is still the largest economy in Africa, which means if we're able to achieve 100% electrification, the sky becomes a starting point for what and where we can be. That's 2. 3, education. Education is a bedrock on which every other thing, in my opinion, starts to move, right? If our people know and understand their problems and can find solutions to them, then we start to solve some of the problems of not just Nigeria, but Africa as a continent. So those 3 things. Poverty alleviation, power, education. And then, of course, that does not mean that you're ignoring, you know, the healthcare sector in our nation that is non-existent, environment that is completely polluted, insecurity that's huge, a big problem, energy. I mean, there's so many things. Every single sector in Nigeria today is untapped. But those 3, for me, will be priority as we also start to tackle some of the other things.
Let's talk about your policies, for instance. You've talked about doubling the salaries of teachers for education. You talked about tech hubs. Given the fiscal situation of Nigeria, Where will you get funds for all of that?
Great question. So here's the thing, and some people would, beg to differ with me, but if you look at Nigeria as an entity, a corporation, a business, right? You get to a point where you need to amplify, revenue to achieve certain things you want to do. So right now, oil is, a main source of revenue, which is, disappointing and disheartening. And shameful, by the way, considering all of the things that we have. We need to strengthen our tax-based system. Nigeria has one of the lowest tax rates and population that are eligible to pay taxes that pay taxes. So we need to tighten up on that, both personal tax, personal income tax, and corporate taxes. But more also, there are certain things that we need to do to start all over again, which requires that we may have to borrow money. There is nothing wrong with borrowing money. The problem we've had in Nigeria is that we've had leadership that circumvents the resources that they get from outside that are supposed to be used to invest in the well-being and the infrastructure of a nation into their pockets, right? So if we borrow money to do the right things that we need to do, there's nothing wrong with a stimulus plan that gets the economy back on track.
A lot of people view your plans as being too tech-centric. And you've talked a lot about artificial intelligence and what AI can do for this country.
Right.
Do you think technology is a solution to the many problems in Nigeria?
Technology is part of the solution to the problems we have. We cannot say that because possibly majority of our population may not understand the importance of technology that we overlook them, partly because Africa has learned how to leapfrog technologies and achieving what it wants to achieve. But also it's taking a look at the future we're walking into and understanding that if we do not, before I get to that part of the problem we've had up to this point is that we've had leaders that have never been able to consider or to prepare us for the future that we're walking into in order to, fashion solutions to our present problems. So in doing that, in understanding that the rest of the world is in this race to a future, an undetermined future right now, where we go from just the human age to also the machine age. And we start to ask ourselves a question, when you have a young populace like we do, who will be in the workforce for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, if they're not prepared for this future that we're walking into, then the problems we have today would become our years of glory days when we get there. So yes, technology is extremely important because it will drive, humanity in that future. And if we're left behind like we've always been, then we end up in a future that is so dystopian that it's almost difficult to imagine what life would be like then.
Nigeria is currently dealing with 80 million extreme poor people.
Yep.
And 16 million Nigerians that fall under your demographic, our demographic. I'm a young person, so I think I can claim that, yeah? 16 million young people are unemployed. Do you think Nigeria is a failed state?
No. I'll tell you why. So when I started my research on disconnection is a term used to describe youth who are out of school and out of work between the ages of 16 and 24 in the US. I was 21 at the time. There were about 7 million of them in the US between the ages of 16 and 24 who were out of school and out of work, or that were termed disconnected. Now, United States of America is a nation that has spent over 200 years building out its democracy, and it has not been able to figure out how to engage and employ a huge chunk of what I call invisible economies. So the disconnected, the at-risk youth, the disconnected youth, and all that. Nigeria is only a nation of just 58 years. We're still figuring out our democracy.
What are the immediate things or immediate plans you have to lift the number of poor people, extremely poor people out of poverty?
Awesome. So I believe that we need a stimulus plan, right? We need to be able to, one, do an apology tour where we tell the nation we're sorry for 58 years of disappointment, of failed leadership from people who lack the vision to lead us aright, right? We have to make our people start to believe once again in a government that can protect, but also facilitates access to opportunities for its people. Now, once you do that, a stimulus plan that says, here is, we want to give you money every month to be able to put food on the table for you and your families and the people who depend on you. However, here's the criteria to doing that. Now, we're not just giving you a handout, free money to go eat, but we want to make sure that you are gaining a skill set, that you understand what it means to contribute to the economy. So here, for you to get this allocation, this money, you have to go through sessions, skills training sessions. You have to learn about entrepreneurship, how to start small businesses, so that if you choose to use a portion of this stimulus package or plan to start up a small business, here are the other things we have in place to help support that. Now, imagine if we're able to churn, half of that population, say 50 of the 87 million, into entrepreneurs, small business entrepreneurs that are contributing to our economy. Imagine how stronger we will be as a nation.
I'd like you to give me the numbers. Within the first 4 years, how many people will you ensure that they gain employment in this country within the first 4 years of your administration?
So there are 200 million people in the nation. There are 36 states plus 36 states plus FCT. I believe in a gradual rolling out of initiatives because, when you face things, you understand, you're able to go back and look at your process and figure out what works and what doesn't work and reiterate, right? You repeat the process until you have something that's perfected. So in the first year, the goal is, if we have the resources we need to initiate this stimulus plan, I want to start within the first 6 months of my administration to do that. To say, listen, people, here's what we want to do for you. However, though, the chips are still in your court to decide how you want to leverage on this. So you have to meet all of these requirements to get this money. Now, at that point, if you decide that you're not going to take those classes and you do not get the money, you are not responsible for what situation you have in hand. So I cannot tell you, well, our policies will get 100 million people out of poverty, because at the end of the day, what we will do is provide the platform for you to help yourself as we try to help you. So I'll leave that questions to Nigerians who are passionate, who are industrious, who are resilient, to decide. Are we going to take this opportunity to get ourselves out with the help of a government that thinks and cares and is empathic and compassionate about our situation, or am I not going to do that? And I bet you most Nigerians would take that opportunity.
So you're not giving me any number to
No.
run with? Interesting.
Because tomorrow you say, well, you promised us 100 million people out of poverty, and forget that I cannot go into their homes to get them out to go do what they need to do.
The current administration of President Muhammadu Buhari takes pride in its social investment scheme, welfare program across the country. Do you believe in that program?
Anything that helps the everyday Nigerian put food on the table is good, is great. Now, do I believe in the program? I don't believe in the politicization of the program, right? Because the state of poverty in Nigeria did not start today, right? Did not start in the last 12 months. So if you start an initiative in an election year with the hopes that it translates to votes, that is evil, in my opinion. However, though, I will not say because it was done in an election year, therefore we should not do it, because people are starving. So give them what they need to survive, period. So do I buy into it? Because it's putting food on people's tables, yes. Do I care about, or do I applaud him for doing it? I don't think so.
Interesting. Nigeria is currently dealing with a security crisis across the country. From the Middle Belt area, there is a herders-farmers clash going on there. Islamic State is rising up almost every day in the northeast of Nigeria. Across the country, there are crises. There's a mass uprising across the world about Boko Haram and the damage they've caused for the Nigerian state. What is your fix?
Security is, well, as with all of our problems, it's extremely important to take a holistic look at how to solve our security issues or insecurity. I say this, for one, we have failed at dealing with insurgencies in an effective way, which is part of what has given rise to insecurity in our nation. And like I say this, part of the problem is we have leaders whose perspective of leadership came from the colonial masters, right? So it's masters and servants. And when there's an uprising with the servants, you suppress or you oppress them to quietness. Well, the truth is, in a democracy, that does not work. When people cry out because there's a lack or there's a need and you fail to listen, it comes back over and over and over again and becomes a problem. Now, if we start to listen to our people a little bit more, if we had a strong economy where every citizen of Nigeria believes that they have access to wealth, to security, to freedoms, to opportunities to create the happiness and whatever the environments that they want for them, some of the problems we have as insurgencies will not arise. That's one. Two, if you look at our law enforcement agency, we have about 370,000, 350,000 policemen guarding a population of 200 million people. That is not sustainable, especially when our population grows at almost 3% every year, which means every year we're adding about 6 million people to our population. Now, the first thing we need to do, and it goes back to that stimulus plan, is make sure that the people who put their lives on the line every day to secure you and I in our nation feel appreciated, right? We need to pay them livable wages, right? We need to make sure that they understand that this is not, you know, the end of the road, right? You don't choose to become a policeman because you cannot do anything, any other thing, right? It should be a career of pride, right? I am serving, I am protecting the nation. And in turn, the nation has that responsibility to take care of your family when you are there or when you're not, right? If anything happens to you in the line of duty, the well-being of your family becomes the responsibility of the state. If we do that, it becomes easier to attract more people. The 30 million people we'll talk about who are unemployed now start to see, you know, becoming law enforcement agents as a viable career path. Now, if we do that, one, we need about 1.5 to at least 2 million policemen across the nation. And until it becomes appealing enough for someone to say, okay, I want to go lay my life down for my nation, we will still have a security problem. So pay people livable wages, make them feel like they're appreciated, right? Increase the number of police law enforcement agents that we have. Once we do that, then start to have the dialogues, the discussions across the nation about the causes of some of these problems. Boko Haram arose from, you know, the pushback against Western education in a culture that does not embrace it. The question would have been, how do we convey the importance of education, whether it's formal or informal, to this group of people? The insurgencies in the Niger Delta is from a group of people who feel like the nation's wealth comes from our land, yet we have the most polluted lands, the most polluted waters, the most polluted environment. Nobody cares about spills. Nobody is held accountable. We've lost our sources of livelihood because the fishes are all dead, you know, and nobody's doing anything about that. Of course, you will get an insurgency. Those in Southeast Biafra believe, well, you know, we are relegated to the bottom of the barrel. Nobody cares about what our needs are. We are always almost oppressed. You know, whenever there's an ethnic, strife, it's, always, this group against this group. So it's listening to people and asking what the problems are and genuinely, compassionately finding solutions to that. If we do that, making sure that you have a strong security system, it becomes easier to hold people accountable. Now, so that's, in my opinion, our security problem is multifaceted, right? It's not just the fact that we have insufficient policemen. It's not just the fact that we don't listen to insurgencies or to people when they complain. It's the fact that, our policemen are not educated enough. They're not equipped enough to do the work that they do. So it makes it difficult to protect a nation when you lack the resources or the know-how to do it.
China pretty much owns Zambia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria and Angola. Why are you laughing? Nigeria and Angola have the largest loans for China.
Yes.
So we are heading that same way. This was your quote from an earlier interview. And I guess that's why when I started, you started laughing.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Nigeria has a China problem?
I think Africa has a China problem. It's much, much, much bigger than just Nigeria alone. I think the buffer we have as a nation is our population and our resources. But the truth is, at some point, it catches up, right? So if people are taking loans from a nation that they're hoping to pay back in 50 or 60 years from now, periods when they will not be here, you and I will probably be the ones paying for those loans that are being taken now that we're not seeing anything being done for them. You start to see how, China's long-term plan becomes more reality even in our lifetimes today. Now, so when I say China owns, all of those nations, Zambia lost their, state media system, state media to China, but their state TV and state radio is owned by Chinese. I think the Chinese also took over their power authority because they defaulted on loans, a bunch of other things there. And same in other countries. I mean, there was this situation in Kenya where, a Chinese restaurant that did not serve Kenyans, and the Chinese guy who owned it called one of his workers, well, the Kenyans were good enough to serve other people, but not to eat there. Called him a monkey. You call him a monkey in Africa, on his own land, So that's what I mean, right? Because we lack leaders that have the impetus, the wherewithal, the wisdom, the vision, the foresight to fight for us. Other people come and they dominate. In fact, I'd say this to people: slavery 2.0 would not be us being hauled off on boats and planes to other nations. It will happen right here. That's what I mean by that.
You seek to replace President Buhari in Aso Rock in 2019.
Yeah.
This government, I'd like you to tell me how the government has done in terms of its war on corruption and, say, security.
I may not be fully truthful if I tell you that I believed that the people who took power all had bad intentions, right? So I believe that when Buhari said he wanted to fight corruption, he probably had a genuine, interest in doing that. The problem, though, we have is you do not have the infrastructure to fight corruption. For one, corruption is a global thing, right? But when you look at the dynamics of our nation, sometimes some of the things we classify as being corrupt practices are just people trying to put food on the table for their families, right? So when a policeman, collects money from cars passing by, it's because he has mouths to feed at home. When a teacher decides, well, I'm printing handouts and students have to buy it to get a grade, it's because, he's trying to make sure he can feed those at home. And I'm not saying that everyone who does it is trying to do that, but at the core, the masses, which is part of the reason we have 87 million people in poverty, extreme poverty, not just poverty, you start to see why some of the things we call corruption is just survival instinct. So for me, the way we tackle corruption is, I'm not going there to jail to say I'm going to jail any and everybody whom I think is corrupt. No, you don't achieve anything by doing that. We see exactly what's going on. What you do is make sure you get 87 million people out of poverty. You strengthen your economy. And then you implement technologies that can help you plug the loopholes that encourage corrupt practices. Blockchain technologies, increase transparency and accountability in governance. If you have some of those things that make it difficult to cheat the system, you start to see how we gradually start to take care of this problem. Make sure we strengthen our security systems. I just talked about part of the issues with our law enforcement agencies and what we need to do to strengthen that. And then you have to have a strong judiciary that can hold people accountable to the law when they break them. Now, those are the ways I feel like we start to curb the impact of corruption in our nation. You cannot eliminate corruption, not even in Western nations. I mean, yeah.
You're from the southeast of Nigeria. Do you genuinely think the Igbos are unfairly treated, or are fairly treated by the Nigerian state?
Unfairly or fairly?
Unfairly treated.
So I am Nigerian, right? So I think one of the greatest lessons of living outside this nation is understanding that while I left this country at 19 as an Igbo boy, because that was all I knew around me. Being in the US as an immigrant alien was understanding that for some people, all they saw was the color of my skin. So for me, the greatest difficulty I had living in the United States was redefining this new identity that nobody prepared me for. And why that's extremely important is in that fight to find this, to reconcile, you know, everything I was taught about myself as a young boy and everything, all of the negative stereotypes that this new environment is trying to make me believe about myself. I understood that I was now part of this global community of Black people who shared the same experiences, who shared the same passions, who shared the same excellence, right? So for me, I became a Black man first, then an African, then a Nigerian before Igbo, right? Because
in Nigeria. Is it a yes or a no answer?
I'll come to that because it's not, I don't think it's a yes or no answer, right? Because I can't say yes, and then somebody in Niger Delta will tell you, well, but we haven't had any source of livelihood for the last 20 years. What do you tell someone like that? Or someone in the north goes, well, we haven't had no sort of development where I come from. What do you tell someone like that? So no, my problem with the state of the Nigerian state is a failed leadership, is a lack of vision from our leaders to understand how to empower a nation, to understand its nation-first ideology.
Are you in support of the agitations of Biafra?
I'm not in support of any agitations that advocate for division, because I think one of our greatest suits is our population, is our collective, you know, ability to be one nation. In fact, left to me, we should buy up both Chad and Niger, because they have more landmass than we do and much less population. And we should start to grow this collective or Pan-Africanism that I think we need as a continent.
With $100 million, you plan to build 36 new hospitals?
Each.
I'd like you to tell me about that.
Okay. So when I looked at the healthcare industry sector in Nigeria, which, like I said, is non-existent, and in fact, the fact that our president leaves the nation to go get healthcare is an indictment on his performance and his administration's performance on healthcare. So I sat down with a couple of experts and I said, what would it cost us to put a 50-bed world-class hospital in each capital city in Nigeria? And when we looked at all of, you know, the budgets and everything it takes, including dependence on, you know, renewable energies, you know, solar and all that, ballpark figure was about $100 million per hospital. Now, that in addition to urban care centers around between 5, I'll say 3 to 5, depending on the size of the state and its population, urban care centers that can help feed into the world-class hospital. And then the training of primary healthcare providers who are in rural areas to have, you know, that connection to the urban care centers and, you know, straight to the world-class hospital is extremely important.
And you think this is a well-thought-out plan, given the fact that the federal government has been unable to manage its own hospitals across the country?
Well, so that's once again, it's all about leadership.
Leadership from who? There are ministers who have to oversee.
Well, okay. So I say this.
Administrative heads.
So I say this, right? For one, public sector system is overbloated, but that's an entirely different topic. When I talk about the importance of making sure that the people that are there are qualified people, we have had this system of empowering people who are either outdated in their knowledge of what needs to happen or are not connected in any way to whatever sectors that you're empowering them with. And once the head is wrong, you can be sure the entire body goes to waste, right? So that's the problem we have in Nigeria today. This is what we need to do in each sector. And this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to hold people accountable. I don't believe that our solutions are only found in Nigeria. It has to be a collaborative effort between Nigerians here and Nigerians in the diaspora, because those in the diaspora are people who have experienced quality of life from a different perspective and can contribute to the solutions of our nation. So let's bring people who have, you know, great expertise in different fields and empower them, merit-based. Are
you open to unbundling the NNPC and removing subsidy?
So actually, one of the first bills I plan to sign on day one will be the PGIB bill. because for petroleum, being our highest, revenue source or source of revenue now, it's important that we stabilize that industry. However, though, moving forward, the reliance on natural resources would not be priority for me at all, because I think we need to develop human capital as predominant source of revenue for our economy. But yes, I will sign that bill so that we can start to correct some of the wrong things there. For instance, the ECA, the extra crude account, there's this other fund that I think should be merged and thrown into the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund to manage the resources we get from oil. Left to me, all of the all of the revenue we get from oil should be invested and that should be put into our sovereign wealth fund. Because if you look at a nation like Norway that has over $1 trillion in its investment fund for its people, what they did was they channel all of their resources from oil into this fund, and they invest from there, such that account made them $131 billion just last year alone, which is more than 2 or 3 times what our oil revenue is, right? So it's making sure we streamline the process, streamline, how we deal with oil and that industry to make sure that it benefits the nation, but more importantly, the future of the nation.
Would you accept to step down for, say, Atiku or the current President Muhammadu Buhari, and also an offer for an appointment, should any of the major 2 candidates emerge as president?
If they emerge as president, there'll be no need to step down. I would have lost.
Would you step down at this point?
Prior to the... Yes. Hell no. Okay. I mean, if I were going to step down, I wouldn't run in the first place. I'm not running for a ministerial position or for an appointment.
If you do not win, would you accept an appointment from any of
them? So I've been asked that question. I say this. It's not as easy as you say, as you think, right? So the priority is putting Nigeria first. So an appointment would be me looking at what the criteria are, what the criteria is, and ask myself, would this give me the opportunity to do the things that need to be done in the best interest of the nation? So you can be sure I would not be joining any parties. I would not be joining PDP or APC at all, regardless of what administration it is and regardless of whatever appointment it is, because I'm not coming there to serve the party, I'm there to serve Nigeria. So the question would be, do not ask me to come lead a ministry that I know nothing about, because that would not be in the best interest of the nation. But if it's you saying, okay, we think that you have the knowledge to tackle this, or to help us develop this area, and I think it's something I'm capable of doing, of course I will take it.
You have an opportunity to make a final pitch to the Nigerian voter.
It's easy to convince ourselves that, 2019 will not happen. I think 2019 is the greatest golden opportunity we have as young people in this nation to redefine politics, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa, right? 2019 is the year when the older people did not realize or see that we could stand up in 5 months and have over 435 young candidates between 25 and 35 come out, be courageous enough to come out to fight for what we believe in. This is the year where we can no longer complain of other people ruining our futures or our well-being, because now we have the right, we have the opportunity to step up to the plate to correct that which we believe is wrong. It has been 58 years, of which I am 35 years of failed promises, of failed leadership, of failed opportunities to grant me and the people behind me and posterity the opportunity for a better life. So the power lies with you. And right now I'm talking to every young person in Nigeria. I'm talking to everyone who believes that there is hope in this nation, or that we can actually get stuff right. The power is right here. We have everything we need within us to change what we want to change. So don't believe the hype. Don't believe that the challenge is so insurmountable that it becomes impossible. No, you defeat whatever challenge you want to defeat here first before it becomes reality. So when someone asks you, is it possible for a young Nigerian to become president come February 16, the response would be a resounding yes. 70% of our population is under 35. 70% of our electorate is under 35.
You have the power to change the current situation in our nation. So now, from this moment on, you can no longer say you do not know. And what we choose tomorrow would be our responsibilities.
We are now part of the problem if we refuse to change the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.